Hi and welcome to Real Reviews. My name's Martin Carr and today I've got an exclusive interview with Gregory Middleton, cinematographer and Emmy nominated for Moon Knight, Game of Thrones and Damon Lindelof's Watchmen. Sit back, relax and enjoy. So, hi. It's really nice to have a little bit of time with Greg Middleton, who is Emmy nominated cinematographer on Watchmen and Moon Knight and also Game of Thrones. So, hello, Greg. And I'm going to jump right into it. And for anyone who is unfamiliar with exactly what it is a cinematographer does, what would you say the primary creative purpose of the cinematographer is?
Well, first of all, good morning, Martin, and thanks for the interest in our show. And for I'm also thank you very much for the interest in our craft. I really appreciate when people are trying to help explain a bit of what we do. So the role of a cinematographer is there's sort of two major parts to it. The first is we are basically in charge from a technical standpoint. We're in charge of the running of the lighting and the grip of the camera crew to help execute the photography of the show. So everything, when I say the photography, I mean everything you would see for the images you'd see in a movie. The lighting, design of the camera, how it all works would be under my supervision and design. So the second part of that is, of course, the artistic interpretation and the trying to figure out how to photograph the scenes with the director, to figure out the filming style, look at visual references together, figure out what the strategy would be we would use to approach to film the show. So it's sort of a two-part thing. From a basic standpoint, if you look at the silent era, we would be behind the camera on the tripod cranking it. That would be we'd be a one-man shop type of thing with one assistant. Now it's much bigger. We have a larger camera crew, and sometimes I'm on the camera operating the camera myself. Usually I'm also supervising a larger team of either camera operators and assistants. So it's there's a lot of managerial sort of team running thing as well to that. But the main part is everything you'd see for the actual photography of something in an image you see in the movie, I would be supervising that.
So with more specificity with regards to Moon Knight, obviously that throws up a lot more challenges than I think the average show. If I think possibly the biggest one would be obviously you have the same actor on screen playing two different characters. So from your perspective, how did you go about getting over that particular obstacle?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things about Moon Knight that were particularly challenging. One is the point of view of the story, because we had a lot of stuff where we had the actual filmmaking style more mimic the point of view of the character, which is something else we do with the camera and filmmaking, is to try to do that. So episode 1, for example, was more from his point of view as Stephen was being haunted, essentially. So we're trying to keep the camera from his perspective, a lot of things like that. What you're referring to is later on in the story, his multiple personalities do manifest as two separate people. So Oscar is playing two parts, not just in a mirror reflection occasionally, but also like acting with himself in episode 5. If we're going to move the camera, if it's going to move into 3D space, like with a dolly or track, then we have to do something where we record that move. And once we pick a take, then Oscar has to then keep in pace with that move afterwards. So if we at least done it with his performance in mind on the first time, then it should be more natural that way. The tricky part is in some scenes you want to be more free. You want to be more like not erratic between takes, have more freedom to move around. For example, the scene at the end of episode 1, when he's in the bathroom mirror speaking to when Stephen is getting freaked out, he's been chased by this jackal creature in the museum, and he's very excited. He wanted to be able to walk back, and we had to do a very careful thing where we're trying to pan over to one side of the mirrors to see the one version of Oscar as Mark, two reflections back, and then back to him, and then do it all in one shot. So that had to be really carefully rehearsed. So we would sort of split the scenes with him twinning into sort of the 3 or 4 techniques. Obviously, anytime we don't see both faces, we can use a double. And Oscar used his brother Mike as his acting double. So Mike would come with him and do all the scenes with him. So when Oscar would just, from a strictly standpoint, Oscar fought for this as something he could bring, which I think was an incredibly smart idea. Because one, he knows Mike's a very good actor. He knows him very well. And it would help Oscar work out the two characters. So when he was rehearsing a scene, you'd have to, okay, I'm going to be Stephen now. Let's figure out what I would do. And then, Mike would act with him. And Mike, and then he'd say, okay, Mike, now do what I did now. And I'm trying to do this. Now let me think about the other character. It's quite a lot of brain work to work both, to block a scene with himself, essentially. And that would let him do that. And then Mike could then act the character both in audio when he was not on camera and keep the pace the same, and in earwig and Oscar's ear. Or if we were over the shoulder, he could just see his shoulder. So if we were doing a scene with a split screen scene, for example, Mike would be on camera with him, but we'd only be using one half of the screen with Oscar. And then they would flip positions, and Mike would then memorize the timing and be the opposite side. So it was a variety of techniques, and it would all depend on on which was best for the scene.
In a more general sense, how would you say, because this is obviously quite an effects heavy show, and comic book movies in a general sense have sort of become quite effects heavy anyway. How do you think that has actually affected your role as a cinematographer?
There's more work now with what happens to the actual image in the photographic sense. Like the biggest part for my, the artistic contribution is part from being, part of the team and helping figure everything else is the actual photography. So now we have a lot of tools in post that we can add things like when we were do film timing, for example, it was only on film. It was something like sending your photos to the film mat, the photo mat type thing, right? The ability to change the image was limited to the color of light you could push through the image to change the color balance. Well, now with you have Photoshop, and look what we can do with our phones, for example. Now people put their phones out, you go, oh, I want to erase that thing in the background. I want to touch up my face. Even on Zoom now, I can touch up my face or change my background. All that kind of technology has been existed in Photoshop for a while, and that merged its way into the digital finishing of the image for photography. So what happened is there'll be a lot of things we could do now with the gamma curve, and I could be very more specific. I could change certain colors, or I could change different areas of the image to the point where it's almost like a ludicrous amount of control it requires some discipline to use, or you can completely get lost.
I was about to say, does it not feel slightly over-engineered if you go in the wrong direction, maybe?
Oh yeah, completely. Tangents are definitely an issue, and also it also takes it a bit out of the space of only me being supervising, because now I'll work with a very talented colorist who will be an expert in the technology, and also a lot of them are very accomplished artists and they have great eyes, and I've got great relationships with 2 or 3 amazing colorists that I've used many times, and they're a great person to collaborate with in that way. But it also does take into a space where producers or studios have much more direct access to, like, well, now we want the image to be more blue, and they will have their sort of like final color pass to something, which would be passed when I see it. And then, ideally, if I've done my work creatively and I have a good relationship with them, then it's going to be very similar to what I want. But it does take a space where it can be taken away from me. And cinematographers always fought to keep some control of the authorship of the photography, to us at least, to have not let it get out, kind of like go off the rails in some ways later. So it introduces that whole political angle of like trying to make sure you have everyone on board for that, and not to lose control of that. There's a lot of times on Moon Knight where they do a lot of visual effects quite late. I don't mean not for any other reason. And there's so much work to do, and they have a very tight schedule. That a lot of scenes were finished. I only get one pass at it, and then I'm relying on Travis, the colorist, who did a wonderful job, to remember my little things, because he's doing this stuff very, very late, like just a couple weeks before it comes out, sometimes at the very end. So there's an element of that which drags out that process and makes the mix of doing that work a bit more complicated. But that goes into the other part now, which is pre-production, because now there's a lot more. Usually, like, it's a traditional sense. We might say a location-based film. We'd scout a lot of locations together. We'd take some photographs. We'd figure out where we're going to shoot. We'd go on a survey and decide all those things. And we might draw storyboards or take photo boards, to take photographs from the positions that we want, to come up with to refine our plan for how we shoot a scene. But now with visual effects, especially with things as animation, there's often more of a previs done, which is like done with computer animation, like very simple animations, and they can bring in the approximate design of the set, move characters around, they can design shots, especially with things like virtual characters. So that's a whole team of pre-visualization artists that are in the visual effects department, sometimes working for the studio directly, like in Marvel, sometimes working for the visual effects company, and they will do entire sequences, and that's very important for budgeting out the visual effects, which are obviously quite important. So you previs things to figure out, well, how many shots, how many elements, would this be a CG character? What's the background going to be? What's going to photo for real? How are we going to photograph that for real? And that happens quite early. Another example would be like the shot at the end of episode 1 in Moon Knight, where it reveals Moon Knight, in the bathroom. Like that whole sequence required a lot of planning because of all the mirrors, everything else. And the last shot was because I got to be involved in just when it started. They were prevising the shot of him coming out of the fight. The fight was always going to be off camera. The idea would be to reveal him afterwards. But I got to help design the shot. Originally, he was going to step out of the hallway, and I thought it'd be much more interesting to come around and see him and see the water reflections and see all the debris, and then maybe see a glimpse of him from behind as he's finishing killing the thing, or acting this out on Zoom with each other. So that shot all got designed kind of in pre-production, and then during the shoot, like I think it was I can't remember which one of our amazingly Emmy-nominated stunt coordinators. It might have been Jamal, stunt coordinator. Jamal he added one more little kick to Moon Knight, to the Jack. He did that. So that shot was designed mostly in previs as far as its execution and how it was going to look, and that was important. So if I hadn't been involved there, I just would have been lighting a shot that I didn't really have any input into where the camera would go. So it's sort of like it extends our what's happened in the last like 10, 15 years. It's hopefully extended our interaction with the entire project from beginning to end, but there's a lot more overlap in various other parts to help contribute to what the image becomes.
I've mentioned Watchmen a couple of times, and obviously you've signed up to Moon Knight, which I would consider to be quite mainstream, and obviously it's Marvel, and Watchmen, which is, I still think it's the greatest television show I've ever seen.
Cheers! Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
I recommend it to everybody. I own it, but I'll never lend it to anyone because I'll never get it back. My point is that they're like the antithesis. One is very much the flip side of the other on so many different levels, but neither of those shows are actually about mass vigilantes or about vengeance on any level. So my question to you is more a case of sensibility, because you don't one doesn't coalesce with the other. So why go from one to the other? That's a question.
Well, I think you mentioned the similarity to them just then by them being not really about mass vigilantes, and that the fact that each story's got very different things. I mean, Watchmen is I'm very proud of that show, and it was incredible. Also, ask for Damon Lindelof and his writing team to sort of like, they really got the spirit of the original comic by making an extension of it in the future that was really, really thematically on point, which I thought was really amazing. And it became a story about trauma and healing and stuff like that. Ironically, Moon Knight is about trauma in a lot of ways, right? And then how trauma creates, the DID characters. But I think that even though Watchmen is definitely more of an ensemble approach, and it's a much more I want to say, there's a lot more iconography and stuff in it in the telling of the story. There's a lot more representational imagery and stuff that's maybe not too realistic, but it helps reinforce the place, and as well as, never mind, the references to the actual comic in terms of certain image type and stuff. But both projects have a real, the common thing they have in common is they're both stories about particular things. And Moon Knight's more of a character study, and it's about, in the end, it's about self-acceptance for me. It's about the character accepting themselves. That gives you the power to, overcome things. It's about understanding what those are and not ignoring parts of yourself, and about the trauma that's created those things. And they're really stories that are separate from what people think of when they think of a comic book or a person in a mask beating people up. And then, because I think that for me, that's the most important thing. Ideally, I'm really attached to the types of stories that really illuminate something about people or about people, society, or just like a compelling story. It has to and move me emotionally. And all the stories that you want to watch more than once, or just like a great song or like a favorite piece of poetry or favorite piece of prose, it has to kind of touch you emotionally. And I think but for me, both those things do. Moon Knight was fascinating for a couple of reasons. It was something that was very mainstream in a lot of ways as far as Marvel comics in general, but the character in the comic specifically is actually quite fringe. Like, he has a lot of very, very devoted fans because he's so out there and a character. And the stories they've told in the comics it's way even crazier than stuff we did in the show, as far as the asylum and not knowing what is real. And then there's certain magic tricks to like being fooled about what reality is, and are challenging our beliefs about what reality is, and also bringing in all these ideas like where dreams come from and what comes into dreams. All that stuff is, for me, very fascinating visually. But the most important part is it was very moving. Like, by the time end, you're like, you really, really are rooting for Stephen and Mark. Like when Stephen, by the end, basically Stephen sacrificed himself to try to save Mark at the end of episode 5. At the beginning, they hate each other. And that's a story, and they're the same person, right? Like, it's to see that journey of self-acceptance is something that I find very moving. So it provided a really amazing opportunity, both to what I thought would be a very moving, emotional story, especially with someone as incredible as Oscar tackling that character, and Ethan, playing a very great kind of dark mirror to the character, which is something that they brought to that. And then also the idea of all these magic trick ideas. I mean, here's one little tidbit thing at the beginning of episode 1, when we're in Steven's apartment, right? He has a fish tank that Gus lives in, right? The little fish tank, or the big fish tank, I should say. And so we were discussing a few things. We were discussing in the conceptual part in the script was, one, originally it was confetti that was going to be wrapped around his bed that he would like leave a little trail for to make sure he didn't sleepwalk, or what he thought was sleepwalking. And the other thing is, we thought, well, maybe we should use sand, because he would have sand for the fish tank, because we also want to think, and we have to make the fish tank sand similar to the sand of the Duat later, so that we want to basically have all these things in, as Muhammad, our brilliant director, would say. He went one great expression, which was when we were debating about whether something was real or not, or whether Stephen was imagining something or Mark was imagining something, and his quote was, "It must always be a question. You always have something in there that you think, was that really something?" And one thing I'm fascinated about, which happens in when you come up with ideas or dreams, is that you're often pulling things from reality, right? You don't actually come from some, ether that's completely original. You do pull a lot of like things from what you just recently seen. That's just how our minds work. And so the idea of like, well, the fish tank should have things in it that are going to come up later in the story. If it's going to be the sand, it should be the stuff for the doo-wop. So we literally have a little miniature version of Tower's barge. If you look at it carefully, the barge is in there, the gates of Osiris are there, there's a little pyramid there, and there's all that stuff that could be later, right? And obviously that's something that he sees every day. So if the doo-wop was in his imagination, or as Tarot says, these things are created for your mind out of something that's familiar to you to be understandable, because it's obviously would be the underworld will be very different to every character that lands there. Then it would come from stuff that he was imagining in this sort of Egyptian stuff he loves, right? So it should the two that makes sense both in literal and also if it's all in his imagination term. And having the discussions of things like that, of what to do visually with it, like how to use the camera and what to place in the background for that, was super fun. And that's an opportunity which not all shows do. You don't always have the elements of filmmaking like that be as prominently used to help delineate like a point of view for the character, for example.
There's a lot of talk about shared universes and DC and Marvel and oversaturation and so on and so forth. But from the perspective of obviously having worked on, as I've said, two shows which don't coalesce in terms of their approach to the superhero universe. What do you think both of those shows add to the conversation in terms of, I don't know, the validity of it carrying on?
The end of the original Watchmen comic is kind of like, is Adrian Veidt basically saying, was it worth it? Like, is it worth it? He's sort of done his duty. He's killed millions of people. He thinks he's united humanity. And as we turn out in the Watchmen comic, no, it hasn't. And the cycle continues, right? He didn't really solve anything. And there was an element of that, I think, that with the end of the comic, the end of the series, that the Damon got to the point with when maybe what if someone else could get Dr. Manhattan's powers? Would that change anything? Or we just have the same cycle again? Like, would she just suddenly get to do it? Or would she go to have a similar journey to Manhattan himself? Because he was also a person to start with. So I think once he figured that out, it was like, okay, it's going to be one sort of thing. So I think as far as the universe goes, whether he did not want to make another series like that. It was not something he wanted to do. And also, I think, frankly, it almost killed everyone on the show as far as writing. It was such a complicated thing to crack. I think it's like 200 days of writer's notes or something like that, 250 days, I think one Tiffany told me once. I think Moon Knight's interesting in the context that, when I find the character really fascinating, I think what Oscar and everyone else helped create for the multiple personalities now, with the inclusion of spoiler for the end of the series, was the Jake Lockley, the third personality. I'm not with my Indy. I'm not allowed to. I don't know anything of what's going on with it, and I'm not really allowed to speculate too much. Except that I find that the stuff in the comics with the three characters are really interesting, and I think the idea that we don't really know what much Jake is like. Oscar and I just bandied about some ideas the last time I saw him about. It's like Jake's like a real dark side. Like, what he's about. Like, where does he come from, and how does he relate to that stuff? There could be some fascinating things, but I think from like a world type of thing, which, and obviously the MCU, they do, there's a lot of their stuff is about putting things together. And I find his character would be an amazing addition to an ensemble of certain characters, because he's such an interesting character. Him involved with other characters. I can just see him with other actors that I know playing his other parts. I don't know, but I think there's a comic run called The Midnight Suns. It has a sort of all mystical characters. But if you think about the actors involved in those parts, and I think of Oscar and the idea of him bouncing between the other personalities, like within conversation and stuff, it really could be fantastic.
Last question, completely off topic. Ask everybody this question. Please, can you describe for me your perfect Sunday afternoon?
Oh, interesting. Oh boy. Well, I have to be only one. I'm only allowed one Sunday afternoon, and then like there's that nuclear bombs drop on Monday. Is that
anything you want it to be, Greg? Anything you want it to be, completely free reign.
Oh, let's see. Okay, so if it was summer, something like, which I can't do right now. So, there's 2 or 3 of my good friends. We go on a kayak camping trip every year, which we can't do this year because there's a couple things have interfered with that. Unfortunately, not COVID related, but sea kayaking is really fun, and that's like one of the perfect opportunities is waking up, making breakfast in a fire by the tent on the beach in one of the Gulf Islands here on the west coast of Canada, and like going for a paddle and like making a meal, and like that's some of the best afternoons I've ever had in my life, and they're really, really lovely, especially with people that are they're like family to me. This group of friends. I don't have any brothers and sisters, and they're like my brothers from other mothers. Is our joke, and that's definitely off the top of my head, because that's around this time of year is when we usually do the trip. So that's on my mind right now. That, or to be perfectly frank, something else, to not to say to them, is I started making films as a kid, and I love making Super 8 movies with my friends, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be doing what I do now and get to work in this in the spaces that I'm in and with the incredible people that I've worked with. And there's literally days when it could be Sunday and I'm just popping by the stage to sit there and think about like how I want to do something or consider some lighting ideas, or acting out scenes with other people, like the director stuff, like as we're planning things. And they're really stuff I really do enjoy, and I feel incredibly grateful I get to do that. And I've had many good Sunday afternoons doing that as well.
Perfect. As I said, I've had a multitude of answers from numerous people, from film directors to production designers to composers. Everyone's different, and it's always interesting because it's a great question. Look, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure. I love the show. I also, as I said, obviously I'm a big fan of Watchmen, so it's a pleasure for me to talk to someone, because, as I said, it's a perfect show in every sense. Enjoy the rest of your day.
I will too. Thank you very much for the interest in our show and Watchmen too. If anything else comes up and want to speak about something like that sometime, please let me know. I'm happy to, and I really appreciate the interest in our craft too, and letting people know what we do. So I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's a big learning experience, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.